If I didn't fire James Comey, we would have never found this stuff. Because when I fired that sleazebag, all hell broke out. They were ratting on each other.
All right, so it goes even farther back than that because of the collusion, because of the Steele dossier and all these allegations that ended up being a hoax. Now it looks like they're really going to press back on the enemies that started this whole thing. We talked about it at the top, the whistleblower. We talked about maybe Hunter Biden. They're going after some of his records. How far, Mr. Mayor, are you guys going to push this now that this whole thing's been acquitted?
Well, I want to prove what happened, because I believe if we prove what happened, he will be totally vindicated. I can take it back to January of 2016. A possibility of the whistleblower was there.
Right.
NSC meeting. NSC, Obama and Biden representatives tell Ukrainian officials, get me dirt on Manafort.
Right.
I have 3 witnesses to that.
Really?
1, 2, 3. If you go to my podcast, you'll see one of them right now. Andriy Teleshenko,
yeah,
Konstantin Kulyuk, and Nazar Kolnitsky. 3 witnesses are willing to get on the witness stand and say that in January 2016,
yeah,
members of Obama's NSC violated the law Mueller was investigating Trump for violating. They asked foreigners for dirty information on an American citizen who was going to be involved in a political campaign.
That's it. Now, the 3 witnesses that you have, did they name names, these 3 witnesses? Do they say who in the Obama administration?
Yeah. Yeah,
really?
They name names.
They do?
And we also have...
We have those names?
We also have a memo.
We have a memo.
Yeah,
what does the memo say? Oh, you do?
Yeah.
You have a memo?
I got a memo, yeah.
So you have the 3 people that can testify to the Obama NSC, and you also have Chalupa, who DNC contractor. You have documentation of all this. Do you have any Hunter Biden documentation? Because that's what Lindsey Graham says he's going to do in the Senate.
I have what I used to call, when I was U.S. attorney, a smoking gun. This is a money laundering transaction. It occurred just at the time that Shokin was fired, and it's about 14.6 million. And this is a notice from the Latvian government to the Ukrainian government that Hunter Biden is under investigation for corruption affair. And then it lays out, I'll simplify it, 14.8 million goes from Ukraine to a company in Latvia, disguised as a loan. Then it goes from Latvia to another company disguised as another loan in Cyprus. And then it goes to the U.S. We lose track of it, because when Shokin gets it, just about the day he's fired, there's no money in here for Devon Archer and Hunter Biden. Everybody else, the money is listed.
The 2 board members.
All the other board members, money listed, money listed, money listed. None for them. So the government has been so lax in investigating this, it's pathetic. I mean, these are crimes that when I was a U.S. attorney, the day Joe Biden made that boastful announcement about how he bribed
big mistake, Joe. Yeah.
The investigation would have begun the next day for bribery.
Right.
He violated the bribery statute. Announcement.
Can we expect that you, as chairman of Judiciary, or Burr, chairman of Intelligence, may want to look at the whistleblower, or we want to look at the Bidens? I know Treasury has subpoenaed Hunter Biden's financial records, but James Risch apparently doesn't have an appetite. He says, of course, he is the chair of Foreign Relations, and he says, I've got other things I'm doing now, and I haven't given it any thought. Haven't given it any thought? America's been talking about this for 3 months.
So we're not going to live in a world where, as a Republican, you get investigated from the day you get sworn in. 3 years later, they're still coming after you. Here's what amazes me. The Russian investigation, what happened? Half the people behind the Russian investigation are going to go to jail, and Trump was cleared.
Hopefully.
Well, just hang tight. They come after Trump on Ukraine, and Biden blows up. So every time they throw a rock at Trump, they get hit. So here's what we should look at. Why did the State Department not act when they were told about the conflict of interest with Hunter Biden regarding the Ukraine, right?
Right.
Who is the whistleblower? Does he have contacts on Schiff's staff? Did Colonel Vindeman leak information to the whistleblower?
Right.
And as to the FISA warrant, how could you sign the warrant 4 times and not know the whole thing was off the rails? That's where I come in.
Okay, so you're going to do something, because even the head of the FISA court said it was wrong. It was not predicated on probable cause. You know the whole thing. So you're going to do something. You want to tell us what you're going to do?
Yeah, I'm going to give a list of witnesses to the Department of Justice that I want to call. It's going to be the case agent. I want to find out how this thing got so screwed up. Why didn't they tell about the Russian source who said, you know, the dossier is not reliable.
That's
How
right.
could it be possible that it never goes up to the top? I want to know what Obama knew about this investigation. I want to call Rosenstein, Sally Yates, Comey and McCabe, and all the people who worked on this case to find out how it got so off the rails and make sure it never happens again. And I want to know who in the White House knew about this counterintelligence investigation against the Republican nominee.
Well, you and I both know that the lovers were saying, you know, the White House wants to be informed of what we're doing. Yeah. I mean, if you just do a timeline and intersperse the love notes, it'll explain it all.
President Trump is sitting there saying it's not about him. It's about the office of the president.
Right.
We need to vet this.
Where's Hunter? Because right now, and we're going to talk to Rudy about this in a little bit, they're going to actually subpoena some records from the Treasury to see if there was any financial irregularities going on with Hunter, with Burisma, and the Obama administration. You called this CPAC 2017. You said this is what it was going to be like. Let's listen.
Here's why it's going to get worse. Because he's going to continue to press his agenda. And as economic conditions get better, as more jobs get better, they're going to continue to fight. If you think they're going to give you your country back without a fight, you are sadly mistaken. Every day it is going to be a fight. Jesse,
do you think the Senate Republicans have what it takes for that kind of scorched earth investigation?
I think they owe it. Here's what the Republicans in the Senate, they owe it to this country. This is like the Church Commission. Remember, the excesses of the CIA and the FBI in the 50s and 60s led to the Church Commission after Watergate in the 70s. That's what we need. Lindsey Graham's judiciary has to start it.
Well, you got Durham, too, on the other side. Are you have a lot of expectation for Durham or not?
That's a criminal proceeding with a grand jury. However that proceeds, it proceeds. This is something actually more important. This is before the nation to see the abuses against Donald Trump.
I've identified a number of statutes on this program that I think very well would have been violated. Prima facie case, certainly a president who has a sworn oath and duty to faithfully execute the laws, asking that question seems to me like he was fulfilling that part of his oath.
Well, it's very concerning. One of the things that the Senate asked for are the suspicious activity reports that the Treasury Department collects from big banks when bank employees see transactions that don't quite add up. And it sounds like there are some of these SARs, they're called, that were turned over to the Senate committee and the chairman. And so I'm going to be very interested what those show. If transactions that Hunter Biden was involved in between the Ukraine and the United States banks raised flags at those banks, that could tip off some really concerning activity on behalf of Hunter. The Foreign Corrupt Practices Act is a very strong act that is used to really end corruption in other countries because the United States values clean and fair transactions and make sure that bribes aren't paid to foreign officials for official action. And those acts are very much in play here. And again, if Hunter Biden, if these SARs show that he was involved in these types of transactions, I would fully expect not only the Senate to be interested in this, but also one of the things that even Adam Schiff has to admit is that the gas company in Ukraine was corrupt, and they hired Hunter Biden for what reason? Because he was the son of the vice president. Everyone agrees to those facts. Even Hunter admitted that on national TV. And so, you know, if you have a corrupt company that is hiring the vice president's son to help, and then that investigation into that corrupt company and this vice president's son's relationship with that company is ended by that same vice president, I mean, that smells, not only does it smell, but you point out that might be even a prima facie case for criminal violation.
It's not just one situation. It's two situations. Millions in Ukraine, billions in China.
It's the collusion story the media does not want to cover obsessively, perhaps because it does not involve President Trump and Russia. Instead, it's all about China infiltrating the office of a very powerful Democrat in Dianne Feinstein. It turns out her longtime staffer, Russell Lowe, who was a driver, as you said, and also liaison to the Asian American community in California. 5 years ago, FBI agents showed up at Feinstein's office in D.C. and revealed her staffer was under investigation for possibly spying for China. The contact with China was certainly serious enough that Feinstein forced the aide into retirement and tried to keep all of this hush-hush until the Chronicle blew the lid off of it.
Last year, I received an invitation to an event that promised to be, quote, an occasion for exclusive deal-making. It said, quote, the opportunities for mutually beneficial economic development between China and our individual states are tremendous, end of quote. Deal-making sounds like it might have come from President Trump, but the invitation was actually from a former governor. I was being invited to the U.S.-China Governors Collaboration Summit. It was an event co-hosted by the National Governors Association and something called the Chinese People's Association for Friendship and Foreign Countries. Sounds pretty harmless. What the invitation did not say is that the group I just mentioned, is the public face of the Chinese Communist Party's official foreign influence agency, the United Front Work Department. Now, I was lucky. I was familiar with that organization from my time as the director of the Central Intelligence Agency, but it got me thinking, how many of you made the link between that group and Chinese Communist Party officials? What if you made a new friend while you were at that event? What if your new friend asked you for introductions to other politically connected and powerful people? What if your new friend offered to invest big money in your state, perhaps in your pension, in industries sensitive to our national security? These aren't hypotheticals. These scenarios are all too true, and they impact American foreign policy significantly. Indeed, last year, a Chinese government-backed think tank in Beijing produced a report that assessed all 50 of America's governors on their attitudes towards China. They labeled each of you friendly, hardline, or ambiguous. I'll let you decide where you think you belong. Someone in China already has. Many of you, indeed, in that report are referenced by name. So here's the lesson. The lesson is that competition with China is not just a federal issue. It's why I wanted to be here today, Governor Hogan. It's happening in your states with consequences for our foreign policy, for the citizens that reside in your states, and indeed for each of you. And in fact, whether you're viewed by the CCP as friendly or hardline, know that it's working you. Know that it's working the team around you. Competition with China is happening inside of your state, and it affects our capacity to perform America's vital national security functions. But while there are places we can cooperate, we can't ignore China's actions and strategic intentions. If we do, we risk the important components of our relationships that benefit both countries. The Chinese government has been methodical in the way it's analyzed our system, our very open system, one that we're deeply proud of. It's assessed our vulnerabilities, and it's decided to exploit our freedoms to gain advantage over us at the federal level, the state level, and the local level. Last year, I announced that I would give a series of speeches on China, and this is part of that. It's the context in which state and local government officials ought to think about the way they lead with respect to our relationship. It's important. China matters. It's been part of my mission at the State Department to mobilize all parts of the United States government. I was out in Silicon Valley a couple of weeks ago to talk to America's leading tech companies about this very set of issues, and I need your help too. What China does in Topeka and Sacramento reverberates in Washington and Beijing and far beyond. Competition with China is happening. It's happening in your state. In fact, I'd be surprised if most of you in the audience have not been lobbied by the Chinese Communist Party directly. Chinese Communist Party friendship organizations like the one that I referenced earlier are in Richmond, Minneapolis, Portland, Jupiter, Florida, and many other cities around the country. But sometimes China's activities aren't quite that public, and I want to talk about some of that today. Let me read you an excerpt of a letter from a Chinese diplomat. It was China's consul general in New York, sent a letter last month to the speaker of one of your state legislatures. Here's what the letter said in part. It said, quote, "As we all know, Taiwan is part of China. Avoid engaging in any official contact with Taiwan, including sending congratulatory messages to the electeds, introducing bills and proclamations for the election, sending officials and representatives to attend the inauguration ceremony, and inviting officials in Taiwan to visit the United States." End of quote from the letter. Think about that. You add a diplomat from China assigned here to the United States, a representative of the Chinese Communist Party in the New York City, sending an official letter urging that an American elected official shouldn't exercise his right to freedom of speech. Let that sink in for just a minute. And this isn't a one-off event. It's happening all across the country. Chinese consulates in New York, in Illinois, in Texas, and 2 in California, bound by the diplomatic responsibilities and rights of the Vienna Convention, are very politically active at the state level, as is the embassy right here in Washington, D.C. Maybe some of you have heard about the time when the Chinese consulate paid the UC San Diego students to protest the Dalai Lama. Or last August, when a former governor, Phil Bryant of Mississippi, received a letter from a diplomat in the council's office in Houston threatening to cancel a Chinese investment if the governor chose to travel to Taiwan. Phil went anyway. Last year, a high school in Chicago disinvited a Taiwanese representative to serve on a climate panel after Chinese pressure. You know, it's one thing to pressure the Secretary of State of the United States of America. It seems quite something else to go after a high school principal. It shows depth. It shows systematization. It shows intent. Chinese Communist Party officials, too, are cultivating relationships with county school board members and local politicians, often through what are known as sister cities programs. The FBI director, and I think the Attorney General too, talked yesterday about something called the 1,000 Talents Plan. It's a plan to recruit scientists and professors to transfer the know-how we have here to China in exchange for enormous paydays. The program's probably targeted campuses in your state. Indeed, the Department of Justice has indicted professors in my home state at the University of Kansas and at Virginia Tech and at Harvard. A Texas A&M investigation reportedly discovered more than 100 academics participating in Chinese talent recruitment plans. Only 5 of them had declared that they were participating in this program.
Q takes us back to April, saying, "Think Navy ship crashes. Bigger than you know. We are active." Q. And then we get these pictures here. And if you remember, we saw this. This would have also been in, this was in May, where we saw all these pallets. And we knew it had something to do with China, right? All these pallets were coming off from China. We didn't know exactly if they were phones or if they were servers. We had a feeling that they they were a ton of both. We're not sure. Then we had this picture from this Apple store. And this is the Apple store in Hong Kong, I believe, when we had this refrigerator, what looked to be a refrigerated truck backing here in this picture. Now Q takes us to this Bloomberg article. And the Bloomberg article is entitled "The Big Hack" right here. Now, it's a massive article. And I've just basically dodged into the pictures because pictures are fun. And it basically shows you an illustrated diagram here of how the hack worked. A Chinese military unit designed and manufactured microchips as small as a sharpened pencil tip. Some of the chips were built to look like signal conditioning couplers, and they incorporated memory, networking capability, and sufficient processing power for an attack. The microchips were inserted at Chinese factories that supplied Supermicro, one of the world's biggest sellers of server motherboards. The compromised motherboards were built into servers assembled by Supermicro. The sabotaged servers made their way inside data centers operated by dozens of companies. When a server was installed and switched on, the microchip altered the operating system's core so it could accept modifications. The chip could also contact computers controlled by the attackers in search of further instructions and code. So it's in regards to this Elemental Technologies. and I believe it's Elemental Technologies actually, and they are owned by Amazon. Now, Q dials us into the part here. Elemental's servers could be found in Department of Defense data centers, the CIA's drone operations, and the onboard networks of Navy warships. Multiple people familiar with the matter say investigators found that the chips had been inserted at factories run by manufacturing subcontractors in China. One official says investigators found that it eventually affected almost 30 companies, including a major bank, government contractors, and the world's most valuable company, Apple Incorporated. So that would explain the pictures, right? One country in particular has an advantage executing this kind of attack, China, which by some estimates makes 75% of the world's mobile phones and 90% of its PCs. But that's just what U.S. investigators found. The chips had been inserted during the manufacturing process, two officials say, by operatives from a unit of the People's Liberation Army in Supermicro. China spies appears to have found a perfect conduit for what U.S. officials now describe as the most significant supply chain attack known to have been carried out against American companies. And Q says, the more you know, Q. So essentially, while Hillary was selling tons and tons of secrets to China, and we've seen this over and over again. And of course, we've got Feinstein and her driver that she had for 20 years. And of course, she ended up walking away with $1 bazillion. How does she do that on a senator's salary, right? We're not really sure. It looks like they were selling everything out to China.
You and I know and do not believe that life is so dear and peace so sweet as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery. You and I have the courage to say to our enemies, there is a price we will not pay. There is a point beyond which they must not advance. The destiny of man is not measured by material computations. When great forces are on the move in the world, we learn we're spirits, not animals. There's something going on in time and space and beyond time and space, which, whether we like it or not, spells duty. You and I have a rendezvous with destiny.